it was a really cool time to be a fan in the 90s, like it is now. We had some quiet in the midst, but it's loud and proud again. Hi, everybody. This is Ashley from the Articulate Coven. I'm swinging through to do a quick reaction video to an Anne Rice interview about Pandora. So let's get rolling, shall we? If you don't know, Pandora is my favorite. I love the book. I love the character. I love everything about her, including the shit she gives Marius.
So more than 100 million novels. Her Vampire Chronicles and Mayfair Witch have earned her large and loyal following. She penned her first novel in 1976 with Interview with the Vampire.
She looks fabulous, by the way. This is like salt and pepper hair, like red velvet.
Her latest book, Pandora, and begins the new tales of the vampires. As always, we're very pleased to have her back at this table. Welcome back.
So the New Tales of the Vampires was this smaller series she started. There's only 2 books in it, Vittorio and Pandora, and I really wish we had gotten more of them. Like, really, really wish. I would not mind a ghost writer to take up some of that. Or Christopher. Christopher, if you're listening, maybe more of these. It was so cool to get to know vampires that we only had heard a little bit about, and we didn't really get their stories. We got maybe a version of their stories through other vampires, like Pandora's. We got a bit of her story through Marius. She's fantastic.
Well, thank you very much, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be here, and you've got my sympathy.
I'm going to make the questions very short.
Sure, you go right ahead.
Large answers. First off, what about this deal from Bartelsman buying Random House, which includes Knopf, huh?
Well, that was a big shock. I was in the office yesterday when that news came down that Bertelsmann had bought Random House. But I think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to have any effect on an author like me. I don't think it's going to have any effect on those of us who are with Knopf. Knopf, as you know, is one of the most distinguished imprints in the company. We're under the Random House umbrella. And as long as we have Sonny Mehta as our president, I have Victoria Wilson as my editor and vice president, I have Linda.
So it sounds like at this time there was some pretty big changes around Random House and Knopf, where she published through them for the longest time. Sounds like there was a little bit of changing of hands, but she wasn't too concerned about it affecting her because she's a badass and is so established, which, you know, that's our girl.
Valentine, who does all the paperback copies of my books, I think we're going to be really unaffected. That's Knopf and Valentine together that I'm speaking of. And other than that, I really don't know a lot about Bertelsmann. I know that we're going from one privately owned entity, Cy Newhouse, to another privately owned entity, which is Bertelsmann. And I know that we're going from one man who was interested in books and magazines to another entity that's interested in books and magazines. So I think that's good. I think that's very good. Now, I've heard complaints outside, you know, of my realm, in my world, that other agents and other authors are a little upset because when you have a house as big as this house is now going to be, I mean, it's now going to have Random House as the umbrella company, but it'll have the Random House imprint, it'll have the Knopf imprint, it'll have Pantheon, it'll have Crown, it'll have Vintage, it'll also have Ballantine. I mean, it has Ballantine already, excuse me.
It feels a little monopoly to me, just saying.
Have Bantam, Delacourt, and Doubleday, and I think there's some others in there that I'm forgetting.
That's insane.
That's a lot under one roof.
So there would be not as much competitive bidding as there might be otherwise.
Exactly. Agents want to have a lot of choices for their authors. Authors want to have a lot of choices for their books. For me, as I said, it's not going to have any effect. I've been with Knopf, if you can believe it, 20 years. I've been with them since 1976.
Wow.
This book, Pandora, for example, is part of a new contract to do a short book every spring. I sold them on this idea. It was my bright idea that we keep doing the big book that we do every fall. And
so at this time, she was basically contracted to do a big book in the fall, and she got them to do a contract with her to do a shorter book in the spring. I don't know how long this contract was for, because it did not last long.
And as you know, some of these books of mine, The Witching Hour, for example, is as big as the phone book. Yeah. And I wanted to continue the Vampire Chronicles in the fall, the adventures of the whole clan of the vampires and what they were doing. But I also wanted to do something in the spring that was more like a novella. Although many people today publish a novel that size and call it a novel. To me, it's a novella. It's about 300 pages. Yeah. And it gives me an opportunity.
And talking shit about people calling 300-page books novels and not novellas.
That I've hinted about and brought on for little cameo appearances It gives me an opportunity to take them now, put them in the forefront, and tell adventures in their lives and tell of escapades in their lives. And that's really what I've done with Pandora.
Who is Pandora?
Well, Pandora first appeared in the Vampire Lestat. She's mentioned by Marius. Marius is supposed to be 2,000 years. He is 2,000 years old. What do I mean, supposed to?
Supposed to be.
You don't know.
2,000 years old. He's a child of the millennia. He's the mentor who can answer all of Lestat's questions. And he mentions in the Vampire Lestat that there was a great love of his life who was the vampire Pandora, but that he's lost track of her, that he doesn't know where she is. Now that was
Lost track of her. Big talk, Marius, considering you threw a fit and left your house. Just saying, a little bit of retconning your history there. I love Pandora so much that I had a cat named Pandora. She was a gift from her college boyfriend, and she lived for 16 years. She was the most amazing cat. She was a 20-pound tortoiseshell calico, and she literally one time knocked my paperback copy of Pandora off the back of the toilet into the toilet water. Just a silly little story about my sweet fat cat, who I miss very much.
in the 18th century. Then, when I came back in The Queen of the Damned, which was the sequel to that novel, Pandora appeared in the 20th century, making her way toward Marius, making her way toward Lestat, making her way to a big sort of confab of the vampires. But again, she remained a sort of
an enigma, yeah. We don't know anything about her at that point.
97.
It begins right now in Paris. And this is Pandora now, today, being persuaded by one of the...
And I mean, not to get all into the book of it all, and let's not forget that I'm reacting to the interview and not the book itself, but it's a great kind of opening to the book. It's David's tried to get her to tell him her story, and they talk about it for a little while, and she can't really decide, but he gives her this like beautiful journal to write in, and she's like, oh shit, you've given me something lovely to put my story in. And it's like, you can tell I won't be able to help myself.
Younger vampires to tell her story. You know, he brings her a notebook. They meet in a Paris cafe. It's raining. It's always raining in my novels. It's New Orleans. It's always raining in New Orleans. It's raining in Paris too. And David brings her a notebook. He says, Pandora, please write down for me everything that happened, to you. And at first she says, impossible.
Who is David Talbot?
David Talbot is a newly made vampire from the Tales of the Body Thief. See, what I'm developing is a whole cast here that I can move around with. I never planned this in 1976. I never dreamed I would do this. Anyway, David persuades Pandora. Pandora then begins to write. She goes all the way back to the Rome of Caesar Augustus, and she begins to tell her story. And she really tells in this little book just the first 100 years, really, the first 100 years of how she was born, how she grew up, how she was made a vampire by Marius. And I really, really deeply got into the history in this.
Yeah, the history, like you can tell Anne was super into the history of this. When Pandora's telling her story about how she grew up in Rome, it is fascinating stuff. And even like as the fall of Rome's happening and she's having to run, one of her brothers betrays the family and she has to run and is like the only survivor of her family. It's just all so interesting and rich. And I think probably because she was so interested in the history of it herself, she was able to write it so vibrantly. It's just, I love this book.
History of Rome.
The history of Rome. And I tend to get into the history in all these books. I love to do research. I love to put these imaginary characters in concrete and real places.
But Charlie Rose is sick in this interview. I think he's got a sore throat.
Which I have not done before. I kind of brought together the minds of the characters with the history of the times. This is really a Roman lady. She thinks like a Roman lady. She's sophisticated. She's very, very broad-minded. She's, I wouldn't say, she's agnostic. She is, which I think most sophisticated Romans were. I think they had become rather superstitious about their religion, but they weren't really it didn't enter into their rational or ethical life that much. She's really like that. And Marius is like that. And I had a lot of fun toying with their ideological arguments. Christianity, comes to the fore.
Yeah, Marius and Pandora argue constantly, and like about different things. They just see the world a little differently, even though they have they're from a very similar background and all of that, but they do have very different takes on things, and it is a big pain point for them as a couple. Because you do, like, I mean, if someone's always like disagreeing with you, it does feel very contrary, and it does feel like you're just trying to start a fight. And they do fight very well, you know, they're going to argue really well
during the time that they're together, and they have terrific arguments about Christianity. Pandora's extremely curious about it, says this is something worth looking into, it's very mysterious. The vampire Marius, very old guard Roman mind, says no, it's an irrational Eastern cult, I don't want anything to do with it.
Talking about Christianity and the development of Christianity, there's a lot.
Get out of here.
There's a lot that happens over the course of their time together, as you know, as the world changes around them. And I love it. I love this book so much.
Never before have I had my characters so rooted in the mindset of the age. And so that was a challenge, and that was fun.
How did you find out about Roman history?
Oh, read and read and read. Just bought one book after another, read everything I could find. I went to the original sources. I read what I could of Ovid. I read what I could. I can't claim to have read all of them. You know, I read...
Pandora loves Ovid, the poet Ovid, and is literally the only reason I ever read Ovid was because of Pandora. And this is, Joel and I have talked about this on the podcast in regular episodes, just that there's so many things that are mentioned in the books that have made us go and explore that, to go learn about that, to go, you know, and Ovid's one for me. I was like, well, now I have to read everything that Ovid wrote, you know. So this was a little bit of a gateway drug into some Roman poetry for me.
Plutarch's Lives. Then I went to the books about Rome, Roman emperors, Roman architecture. I had been to Italy. Well, I've been to Italy now 4 times. And on one of my trips, I had been all through Pompeii, the ruins south of Naples, and I had walked through the ruins of these Roman houses and villas. So I had a wonderful time creating Pandora's houses. You know, I knew just where rooms would be and so forth. It was tremendous fun. It was also the first time I've ever written about a female vampire at any length.
Yes.
Why is that?
I'm not sure. It's psychological. There's no question about it. There's some deep psychological reason. It's easier to write about a male creeping around at night, getting into trouble, climbing over walls, going into back alleys. But I was able to do that with this woman. I was able to make her very strong and very independent and very free, and really develop a good voice for her.
Yeah. So she's talking about how she doesn't write a lot of women. This is the first time. Pandora was the first and... Oh, no, we have Merrick. I was going to say the first and only time, I think. No. But one of the first time she ever wrote a vampire chronicle or, you know, story from female vampires in a female vampire's voice. And she admits that it's probably something deeply psychological. That it's easier to write the fun of the men, you know, traipsing around and getting into shenanigans. But Pandora has such a very clear voice. She is able to really craft a brilliant character, who is independent. Like she says, independent, brave. She is tenacious, you know, she is smart. She is sassy, you know, she is such a well-rounded character. I still don't understand what happens to her later to make her so withdrawn and so sad and so kind of lost seeming. And we don't ever really get a good explanation of that. Well, not in what I've read so far. We may get more. There's books I haven't read because, you know, I'm a fake fan.
And I'm not sure why that was.
Did you give her all these characteristics that you admire? And
I made her somebody I like very much. She's very...
I made her someone I like very much.
Word for a man, plucky. You see, that may be a sexist distinction.
She just called her plucky and is wondering if that's sexist.
And she at one point, she is thrown on her own. The family is murdered, Roman style. They fall out of grace with the emperor, and they, you know, all the men are murdered. And she has to get out of Rome and go places on her own, and she's got money. But the question is how to set up a life. This is long before the vampire blood enters the picture.
That's what I want to ask you. When does she discover that she likes the blood?
Well, she doesn't really. She discovers her old friend Marius, and Marius has subsequently been transformed into a vampire. And she sort of gets ensnared with the vampires, and then Marius is placed in a position where...
Yeah. It's another one of those situations kind of like with Nikki, where it's like at this point, Lestat had to turn Nikki because Nikki had been so abused and so mistreated and had so much blood taken from him from the vampires in the Coven. Pandora is actually, like, just by happenstance, by running into Marius again, there's a blood drinker, I think it was horribly, like, burned blood drinker, running around town, and she ends up getting, like, kidnapped by him, and it gets to the point that Marius doesn't have a choice but to turn her into a vampire. She is a really cool character because she has, like, visions almost of, like, dreams of a life she's lived before and felt like maybe she had been a vampire before or had some kind of knowledge and understanding of it.
Because she's been attacked by one of the others, and you know, I don't want to give away all the secrets.
How do you make somebody a vampire?
A blood exchange, a deep blood exchange. You have to, it's not simply, you know, you don't just bite the person on the neck. It's, you know, you have to really exchange blood. It's a long, drawn-out process, and when you do it by choice. So this is all my mythology that I've been developing.
She's talking about, you know, her mythology.
Like you do.
She's, you know, been developing the mythology of her vampire world for 30 years at this point. So she knows, you know, how her vampires act and what's required of them to turn someone else into a vampire and what's dangerous to them and what's not.
You know, that has the same fascination, and who writes about it, not as well and certainly not as commercially successful, but has this huge, huge curiosity, fascination, and also capacity to make the characters come alive.
I really don't know, Charlie. I really don't know. I know from
me. You
must
hear from everybody who just, I mean, they read these books for some reason, other in addition to the fact that you're a great storyteller.
Well, what I hear from people more or less, I have an open fan line, forgive me. I have an open reader line at home that people can call. It's listed under Anne Rice, and they can leave a message for me on the machine.
So she's talking about how she had, and y'all, she had this for years in the 90s, a phone line set up that was, like, hooked up to an answering machine or an answering system, and you could call and leave a message and she would answer you. It was crazy. She made herself so available to her fans at the height of all this in the 90s, like when we were all so obsessed. The fan club was doing the vampire balls and things like that. Like, this was such a cool time to be a fan. It's like kind of how it feels now, because we're so excited about all the you know, the series and how well it's going and how well it's been developed, and it was a really cool time to be a fan in the 90s, like it is now. We had some quiet in the midst, but it's loud and proud again.
And they frequently leave messages about what they like or they don't like about the characters. But most of the time, they're so close to the work that they don't really give me an insight into why it works for all of them. They'll just call up and say, what is Lestat going to do next? Why has Armand not come back? Where is David? Why don't you mention Gabrielle? And they'll talk about them like they're real people.
What is the fascination, you think, with vampires?
Well, I don't think in the case of my readers it's totally with vampires. I think it's with these characters.
Yeah. He asked her, like, what do you think the interest is with vampires? And I think he also, right before that, he's got a real messed up throat in this episode, but I mean, in this interview, I think he really must have been sick. But he asks her, you know, like, what is it about your work that is appealing to people? And, you know, she said that it's not, people don't talk to her about that. They want to know what's next. You know, why haven't we seen, like, where's Gabrielle? What's going on with David? What's Lestat going to do next? Why haven't we seen Armand? You know, and it's that connection to the characters. It's not just about it being vampires. It's not just about it. And I mean, I think that's very true. Like, I was a real snob when everyone was reading those Twilight books, and I was like, no, I have my vampires. I don't need these vampires. These vampires don't make sense to me. I have these vampires. These vampires I know. These vampires I love. These vampires are challenging and confusing and confounding and, you know, disasters and you know, magical fucking beings that we love.
I think it's the personalities of these characters. The fact that they're vampires adds tremendous charm for the readers. These are elegant, these are elegant creatures of the night. They go around in a melancholy frame of mind. So it makes them sort of
exotic and erotic.
Exactly. They feel very guilty about taking human life. They try to prey only on the evildoer if they possibly can. They dress beautifully. They love beauty, they love sensuality. So there's a great deal of romance when we give a signing. A lot of the kids come dressed in velvet, and they come.
talking about, the romance of it all, that her vampires are designed to be sensual and sexy, and they're always the most beautiful of creatures. That was one of the rules in the old covens. You don't make an ugly vampire. And that's part of the appeal, is that they're very attractive. They're very seductive, and they're romantic in this very kind of old school sort of way. I love it.
Dressed in lace, and they'll wear period costumes. They'll say, "I'm Lestat from the 18th century," or they'll come dressed as maybe one of the Mayfair witches. The same thing applies to those characters in that book.
What do you read for pleasure when you're not?
For pleasure, I don't. I delve into history for pleasure, and I have to confess that lately I've been terrifically involved in the news for pleasure and pain. I've been watching breathlessly the controversy surrounding President Clinton and his various, non-adventures or adventures or whatever.
Oh dear. So he asked what she reads for pleasure, and it's history, and at this point the news. And now she's bringing up Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, who was from Arkansas, Woo Pig Suey, and also slept with an intern in the White House, in the Oval Office. That was our old school scandals. Now we have a guy who... Ashley, stop. Don't get political.
They are alleged adventures, and that's what I do, more or less, with my time. If I'm
What do you think of all that?
Well, I'm squarely in the president's corner. I believe very strongly in the president of the United States, and I have to confess that I'm very alarmed at this point about the accusations of Miss Willie and Miss Tripp and Miss Jones, because I think they're making us as women look bad. I want equality for women. I want women to be strong. I want us to have equal rights. I want us to be perceived as honorable people. I want us to be perceived as consistent people, as people with integrity, people who know their own minds. And I don't like what I hear right now. I don't like the kind of charges that are being made, the seeming inconsistency with somebody like Miss Willie, who was working on a book deal and then working with the tabloids, and then seemed to have given the president the impression at one point that whatever happened in the Oval Office on that fateful day was okay, but now years later she decides it's not okay. Whatever it was. I'm very, very puzzled by the whole thing. I really want...
Hard to know what's true, isn't it?
I want the president to run the country. I want him to be the leader of the free world.
I mean, he ran the country fine. He just got a blowjob. That doesn't seem like that serious when you consider other things that other presidents have done. He did lie about it. She was an intern. There was a power thing in place for sure. This was not a classy time. But Anne's talking about how I don't necessarily agree with this, because we don't victim blame now. Like, we are in a better place mentally about the kinds of things. God, I can't believe we're about to talk about this right now. We're all more cognizant, I think, now of like what's inappropriate and what is not. And this all... from time to time, this all just felt like gossip. It felt strange. It felt like people were, set up, and I don't know. It's not good. It's not good. This isn't the best take from Anne, but it was the take that a lot of women had at that time. I will say that a lot of us kind of had that, and I mean, he was a good president. Like, fucking get back to work and let's get on with our lives.
Morality to me is feeding the hungry, it's sheltering the homeless, it's protecting us from germ warfare, it's caring about getting Medicare to people who are younger. Perhaps the president said about 3 or 4 days ago that he wanted to get Medicare to people who are 55 years of age. That's really what concerns me. I think that's a great idea. And
Anne wants to know less about what's going on in your pants and more to know about how you're helping people.
Pass this kind of tabloid politics and to just keep doing it.
Yeah, tabloid politics.
My feeling
it was definitely the same.
Was true.
Whatever part of it, not in the same context that's alleged, it wouldn't really bother you because you feel really good about this guy. So
well, that's actually true. It's his personal life. If it's okay with Hillary Clinton, it's okay with me.
If it's okay with Hillary Clinton, it's okay with me.
That's really the thing. And I think if Bill Clinton comes out of this all right, which I believe he is going to,
He came out of it
it's going
fine.
to strengthen the presidency, because I think we'll realize that these charges cannot bring down the president. That it's going to take a great deal more than this, substantially more than this, to bring down the president. I think that's
Clearly, since we had one that tried to do a coup.
Coming out. Armand is coming out in the fall.
That's right.
That's one of the big ones, huh?
Armand. The Vampire Armand, right? And that'll be my big Vampire Chronicle, and that'll be out on Halloween.
And what's the next movie?
Oh, the next movie. I have no idea. It could be The Mummy. It could be the sequel to, it could be The Vampire
Is Geffen
Lestat.
going to make the others or someone else?
No, Geffen's gone off to DreamWorks, and now we're at Warner Brothers. And one of the nice irons in the fire that I have is that James Cameron happens to be the owner of The Mummy.
So James Cameron had the rights to The Mummy and never did anything with it? James, the fuck? What the hell? So this is a time where the Warner Brothers has the rights to her films. James Cameron sounds like has the right to The Mummy. And no one did anything for us. We got no movies. But now we get the amazing series.
When Jim won for the Titanic, I mean, I was just absolutely...
The Mummy was on the Titanic and escaped.
I hope that he turns to The Mummy next. I don't know if he will. He's too busy now for me to ask. It's just not polite to ask when a man is enjoying the kind of success that he's enjoyed with the Titanic. By the way, I enjoyed him very much when he was on your show. I was riveted during that discussion. But maybe The Mummy will be next. I hope so.
Thank you for coming.
That would be fabulous.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Anne Rice's
very
new
much, Charlie.
novel is Pandora. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Well, that was that Charlie Rose interview. I didn't expect to be talking about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky and dresses with stains, cigars, but here we are. It was 1997, kids. That was the time to be alive. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I'm talking about at this point. Yeah, so if you haven't read Pandora, do, please. And you can listen to our episode of The Articulate Coven, which covers it. We did a nice little episode talking about it. Again, it's one of my favorite books. I love it so much. I love that character so much. I really related to her and just, yeah, I fell in love with her, and her journey that we got to go on with her. So at any rate, I hope everyone's doing great. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll be putting out some more here soon. We've got the merch shop is open and up and running, so feel free to get you some swag if you need it. And I'll see you next time. All right, bye-bye.